I'm Jitter Buchanan, and in this video we're going to take a second look at Sculpture's modulation options. This follows part one, where we had a look at all of the options that exist over here on the left-hand side for Sculpture. But before we have a little recap, let's firstly talk about what Sculpture is. So this is Logic's physical modeling instrument. Physical modeling, unlike regular synthesis, is based on the idea that what we have is a virtual string, a real kind of string, if you like, made of nylon or wood or steel or glass. And what we can do with that virtual string is we can get it moving in a number of ways. We can pluck it or drop things on it, or we can bow it. And effectively what Sculpture allows us to do is to imagine this kind of physical string, albeit a virtual one, and effectively produce extraordinary sounds from the sort of way that we get that string moving, the way that that movement is picked up, and a whole bunch of other parameters too. It really is a remarkable instrument. Now, in the previous modulation video, what I did was to start looking at some of the ways in which a sound can be modulated using LFOs, this interesting kind of jitter module, vibrato, what we can do with velocity, a whole range of things, all of which exist down here in the bottom left-hand corner. What we're going to do in this second modulation of Sculpture video is to concentrate our efforts around the Morph Square, which is this area down here at the bottom. Now, this is a really interesting place where movement can be brought to sounds by effectively creating what we refer to as breakpoint envelopes. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. Okay, so in order to use the Morph Square, firstly what I need to do is to kind of choose one of these modes. I'm going to choose this one here, and what this is going to do is to make active these anchors around the outsides of the Morph Square, as well as this central area in the middle. Now, what these anchors allow me to do is to effectively create a position for a number of different parameters within Sculpture. If I click on A, I just need to enable the pad first. If I click on A, then what I have a chance to do is to then effectively create a sort of an offset for a number of parameters. Now, I'm going to keep things a little bit straightforward for now, and I'm just going to concentrate on this material square here. So what I've done is I've just created an offset of the position of the material square. Remember, this is the square that determines whether or not our virtual string is made of nylon or wood or steel or glass. So what I've done is I've basically clicked on A and I've moved up towards the top left-hand corner. That means that any movement I make towards this area will make the virtual string more nylon-y than steel or glass or wood. Okay, what I'm then going to do is to move to the bottom left-hand corner, and I'm going to create an offset here which biases the sound towards steel. And I'm going to do the same thing here for point D, where I'm going to bias it towards glass, and I'm going to do the same thing here by biasing it towards wood. Okay, what I'm also going to do is to make sure that my central point, just for now, is kind of in the middle. Now, there's no need for me to necessarily track the positions of the square here. In other words, I could click on A and have this be wood based, and I could select B and make it nylon based. So effectively, I'm inverting those two positions if I want. But just to keep things simple for now, I've kind of mapped the material square to the Morph Square. So what that means in real terms is that what I can then do is to grab this red ball, and you can see that I can begin to introduce movement to a sound simply by moving this around, and you can see the tracking movement of the way that that is behaving. Now, you might be thinking, well, why are the other little red lines or dots around the interface moving as well? Okay, so these are other mappable parameters. In addition to moving the red ball up towards nylon to have my sound become a bit more nylon-y, if I wanted to, what I could also do would be to map any other parameter that has got a red dot on it. So if I wanted to, for instance, what I could do would be to say, okay, as well as this being biased towards nylon, I also want a slightly different filter cutoff for this position, because that's one of the mappable parameters. And now, effectively, that will happen and become part of that experience. You can see as I move up here, the cutoff is dropping to the area where I put it. And some of the others are moving because they change in character as I move between nylon, wood, steel, and glass. They have different properties, and therefore the tension mod of our string, for instance, is changing as it moves from one material to another. So some of that is just sort of happening automatically as a result of the different materials that are being used. Okay, so the first thing I can do is to play a note, and I can use my Morph Square to create these offsets. does some of that sound a little bit like R2-D2 being worried? Yeah, I think it does. Okay, so what we've got is this amazingly now morphing, moving sound. And if we didn't want to go any further, we just wanted to use effectively a note like this and then to engage automation mode and to actually just literally just draw movements of our sounds, you can see that from a sound design perspective, that would be an amazingly powerful thing. But what we're actually going to do is to create what's referred to as a breakpoint envelope. In other words, we're going to record some of that movement and turn it into something that then becomes permanently part of the sound, meaning that every time I play a note, those movements will track around the morph square. To do that, what I need to do is to do a couple of things. Firstly, I'm going to need to actually record that movement, and I can do that via what's referred to as this record trigger. Now, there are a couple of options here, but the one that you want to use if you want to do what I've just done, which is to actually use the red ball to create the shape that you want, is to stick with this middle option here, which is called Note plus Move Morph Point. What that means is that when I press this little record arm light, which is just going to flash at me, what's going to happen is that I need to press a note, and that's going to trigger the beginning of that movement, and then I'm going to actually just move the morph square positions just as I have a moment ago, but this time they're going to create an envelope for us. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to play a note, I'm going to create a little bit of movement, and we'll see what happens as a result. Okay, so you can see the shape that I sort of undertook, and we can now see what's happened as a result. The orange breakpoint is the first breakpoint within my envelope. And what's going to happen now when I play a note is that we're going to begin to see the tracking of the movement that I sort of undertook play out in real time. The only thing is, it's actually going to stop, as we'll see. Okay, so what's so great about working with these envelopes is that firstly, why did it stop? Well, what happens is that Logic or Sculpture will automatically assign what's referred to as a sustain point within your breakpoint envelope. Now I can move that. I can make it any one of these points, either an earlier one or a later one, and effectively what will happen is that the breakpoint will begin, it will get to the sustain point, and then it's just going to hold there, and you can then see that when I release a note, it then continues to track around the remaining points. And the reason why that's so great is because that happens on an individual note basis. So in other words, every time I add a new note to a chord, it begins the journey through those breakpoint envelopes. And the great thing about that is it means that I can create one note which begins its journey and then gets to the sustain point and holds, and then I can add another note and another note and another note, and effectively they'll all sort of track each other just as they did a moment ago, effectively adding to this amazing sense of movement that the morph square can provide. And that's true both as we play through notes and introduce them and when we release them, because of course effectively it's going to then make its way through the remaining points as we come round this area. So effectively what the morph square allows us to do is to create these really interesting breakpoint envelopes. And at the moment all of this is just simply happening in free time, because what I have within this envelope section is milliseconds selected as the speed that is effectively created, or the time period that is allocated to each of these individual breakpoints. If I want to, I can come into sync mode, and at that point effectively a sort of quantizable speed is allocated to each of these notes instead. So I can see that effectively what I've got across my 10 separate breakpoints is a quarter note between each one. And effectively that's going to mean that the movement from one point to another effectively is gathered or is allocated as one quarter note. Now, of course, depending on the types of sounds that you're using and the kinds of shapes that you've created, that actually allows for the possibility of creating some really interesting locked rhythmic movement if you want to. I'm obviously favouring something which is a bit smoother, and I'm really enjoying the fact that there's just this sort of millisecond gap, which is effectively sort of free time. One more thing to say, which is that what we also have a chance to do is to move breakpoints in post-production, if you like. So if I create a shape and I'm happy with the number of points that I have, but I'm not happy with their position, I can move them. So in other words, if this kind of area around the middle section is getting a little bit gnarly and a little bit big, if I want to, what I can of course do is just simply drag points a little bit further away from the middle. And of course, I can start getting really bold with where they sort of go. And if I want to, I can really just completely reinvent the shape that I've sort of created here. I've also got an opportunity to change the depth of the envelope. So if I want things to be more extreme or less extreme, you can see that this little depth control here is going to allow me to either move all of the points nearer to the middle or further away to the edges. If you're not enjoying that, you're watching the wrong channel. There you go, I've said it. And the reason I've said it is because you can see the power of this is absolutely unbelievable. Now, don't expect to create sequences which behave completely predictably. This is an adventure playground. If you design exactly the sound that you intended to when you begin working with Morph Squares, well, then you're a much smarter person than I am. I come here to create a little bit of mayhem and a little bit of chaos, and often I find myself creating sounds like this, turning them into audio and then beginning to process them, chop them up, do interesting things with them. This doesn't have to be an end point. It can just be the beginning for a whole new range of sonic experimentation. So in this second part of Sculpture's modulation options, having looked at all of the areas to the left-hand side, what we've now done is to focus on this middle area and the incredible power of this Morph Square.